from JV to varsity, and we're practicing. So I had to drive back to Springfield and join in, and lo and behold, we get there, and the first thing he does is they're full court pressing. That's what the first team is trying to do. So we're trying to break full court press. And there's this guy I've never seen before out there throwing this behind the back stuff and doing this. And I'm like, what in the world? And then he starts talking all this Northeastern language. And I'm like, oh my gosh, our image of the Northeast people. But we became best of friends. And I know he would do anything for me, and the same likewise in his family. And we love them. Brent and Brock and as our own. But this is a cool, surreal time this morning for us. Sherry shared a little bit as she was singing that song, which was even difficult for me to get through. But it has been 11 years, almost to the day, 11 years since the last time she led worship and I spoke. And we stood here together bantering right before my message. It's been 11 years almost to the day. And so this is kind of cool to be here.
It is. It is.
Do this together.
There's so much water under the bridge in the last 11 years, but I'm really, really thankful for where we are today and where God has brought us from and where we are now. And I just wanted to say that I think this church is so cool because Jeff and I have been in the ministry our whole lives, and we're raised around the ministry and churches, various churches, and I can tell you that 99.9% of the churches in the United States of America are predominantly women, filled with predominantly women. And when I look out here and see how many men are sitting out here, I just think it's so awesome.
Yeah.
And I know that's a testimony to your pastor, Jeff. We call him J-Dub.
Yeah.
And the competitive spirit of the men in the church, I just love it. I think it's so great. So you guys bless me. You really, really bless me.
Yeah, we could actually, if it wasn't for our grandkids and the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers are in this town, we could really, we could see ourselves moving here. We really could. I mean, we'd love to be a part.
Yeah, we love it.
We feel a part, but we would love to be a part on a daily basis. And like J-Dub said, we've sat around just sharing, just talking. When you're a pastor, you don't really get it until you've been in that position. The pressures, laying. I promise you, he lays in bed at night thinking of you with the weight of the souls of the men and women that he's in charge of as far as being your pastor weighs upon you. It's a challenge. It's a heavy. And thinking about and praying for you and your family and what you're going through, and it's a big deal. And so to be able to, to sit and share and us talk, it's just good to have that. It's good for me, and I know it's good for him, and we love it. But anyway, I just wanted her to stand up with me for a little bit, just for old times, but. I don't know about any of you, but I am still sore from that bowling the other night, you guys. When you exercise and you do those, you do those lunges, that I don't do those. And doing this, I woke up the next morning, and that right there still hurts me. This muscle and my left butt cheek is just, it's gone. I mean, it's hurting just from that motion right there. But, listen, I love the idea, and what I love about the nature of this church so much is that everybody just seems to be doing life together, just doing life together, just going through, seeing each other, going through struggles, going through the positives. I saw the men together, played golf with various ones. Some have come over, and we had, ate together, and we're just trying to make it through, are we not? And as we think about Easter, this is the time of Lent. I think this is the 5th Sunday of Lent, if I've got my timeline right. And it's a start of what they call Passiontide. Passiontide, which is kind of the last 2 weeks approaching Easter. And this week commemorates Christ's last year of ministry, whereas next week, as we approach Palm Sunday and go through that week, kind of commemorates his final week of ministry of his life. You know, there's even a color designation for this week. I think there is for each one. This week is supposed to be red or crimson. I didn't wear any red, but there's a color coordinated with each week as well. In some churches, they cover the crosses. Now, I know some of you have different backgrounds, Catholic, different ones, but I was raised in a certain style of church. You know, Connie, much like you, in a certain church, and that's all I've known. Over the last few weeks, months, Sherry and I, this is the first time this year that one of us hasn't been on staff. We're celebrating 37 years this year of marriage, and we have been a part of a church on staff, either paid staff or whatever, for that full amount of time. And so we were always a part of one, that church. And they were all pretty much the same style, the same kind of church. So one of the things that we always wanted to do was to go around and just visit different churches. You know, when you're young and you've got all these ideas and you think you know it all, you kind of have certain ideas about certain churches. And you feel like the church that you're a part of has got it figured out. Right? I mean, you're doing the right thing, and they're just a little bit out there, but bless their hearts, hopefully they'll get it together and still make it to heaven. You have those times. Well now, you grow up, you begin to understand, we just want to experience different forms of worship, different styles of churches, and so we've been doing that. We've just been attending churches like we never have, and some of you, this may be your background, but for us, it was absolutely not. And so this past Sunday, we went to an Episcopal church for the very first time. And you know how ceremonial and the certain things that they do, and they sing hymns, but not just the hymns, Connie, that we grew up in our church. They were a little more like some of the movies you watch, the certain tones, and it was unique just to sit there and listen and try to follow the notes and sing some of those songs, and the ceremony of what they, all the leaders up there, what they wore, and the stripe down the robes with the stripe, and at certain time, about halfway through the service, they came out. And one young guy was carrying this big, you could tell it was a cross. And the reason I'm telling this story is because one of the things they do during Lent, a lot of churches, is they cover the cross with a cloth, with either purple or crimson or black cloth, because they don't want people, it's a symbol to get people not to be distracted from the penance and from drawing closer to Christ that you're supposed to, and not get caught off with the splendor of the crosses. I could tell it was covered, but this person was also carrying this Bible, this big Bible, and it looked like it had been bedazzled. You know what I mean? It had gold plate, gold and silver and all that kind of stuff, and they're carrying it out like this. And as they come by, as they're walking down the aisle, Steve, you would be singing this hymn, and as they walk by, you would turn like this and bow to the, and they walked up about halfway. We were sitting towards the back. And then they turned around and they quit singing, and then they would, proclaim, something, read something from the scripture. And we just thought it was just so cool just to be a part of that. And to come up they did communion, and they came all the way up, and they had the communion way up here. And so you went upstairs, and you went up another set of stairs. The choir, the men sat on one side, the women on the other, and I knelt down, and they give you the cracker, and then they come back, and they dip it in the wine, it was just the coolest thing, because we had never experienced that before. But they covered the cross with the cloth. They don't want people to get distracted from what Lent is all about. And so as I was we've been experiencing these, and I've been reading some different scripture. I just want to share with you a few thoughts this morning from the passage in John chapter number 12, verses 20 through 23. And you're welcome to put that up in whatever version, if you like. You don't have to, because I'm just gonna kind of tell the story. It's the story, it was already after the triumphal entry. It was already they were getting ready for the Passover. We're in the last time of Christ's life. And it says that there were some Greeks who went up to worship at the festival. Now, there was a big influx of people coming in because everybody's getting ready for a Passover. And they came to Philip. Now, I don't know why necessarily they came to Philip, but these Greeks here, Jesus was taking, a little break. He had been speaking, things were happening, and people were coming into town, getting ready for Passover. And these couple of Greeks came to Philip, maybe because he's the only one that spoke, maybe he spoke better than the rest of them, who knows, but they came to Philip and said, we want to see Jesus. Can we see Jesus? So Philip went to tell Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip together went to Jesus, and they said, hey, these guys they'd like to see you. And Jesus said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I love that. The hour has finally come. And that's what Lent's about. We're celebrating, this is the time that we're celebrating, the greatest celebration of us as believers, the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, right? I mean, without that, we're not here today. But back in John chapter number 2, if you remember, Mary, they were at the wedding feast, and Mary goes and says, Jesus, they just ran out of wine. And because she knew what he's capable of. And Jesus said, listen, woman, my hour has not yet come. And then later on in chapter number 7, they were trying to arrest him because they didn't like what he was doing. The Pharisees didn't like it. And they came to arrest him, but they couldn't because his hour had not yet come. And then in John chapter 8, he was speaking in the synagogues, and the scripture specifically says, it makes a point to say, no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. But now he's saying, the hour has come. So as we draw near to the celebration of his resurrection, let's focus on drawing near to him. And I want to hone in on the question that the Greeks asked today and just give you just a couple of simple thoughts. We want to see Jesus. Do you want to see Jesus? And what exactly were they asking when they say, I'd like to see Jesus? I had a feeling that they have seen Jesus. Now, maybe not. Maybe they just heard stories, and as soon as they got to town, they're like, all right, let's go find out where Jesus is at, where he's staying, and let's go see him. Maybe, but more than likely, they had seen him from a distance, that they had probably heard him speak, but he was way up there, on the side of the mountain, side of the hill, and he's speaking, and all the crowds probably couldn't get in close enough. J-Deb, whenever I was a youth pastor, I would take our youth group every once in a while for outings. I'd like to take them to professional games. And so we'd go see the Mavericks or go watch the Rangers, and because that was the closest professional team at the time. And I always got the cheapest package we could so that all these kids could afford it. And so we would sit up in the nosebleed section going to these games. I mean, you couldn't even tell who the players were. And sometimes there'd be a pole there, and you're having to watch the game, around a pole, trying to watch the game. It was horrible. But these Greeks, they wanted a front row seat. When we started pastoring, there was a guy that used to play for, in fact, he played for the Patriots, Pete. He was a kicker, and he got hurt, and he lost his position to, was it Vinatieri that was such the good? And he never got his position back. Of course, he became one of the greatest of all time, but that's who he lost his position to. So he loved to go to these games, and he loved to talk about professional sports. So he took me. I got to go in the old Cowboys Stadium. I got to watch 2 games, and he brought us right down. He got seats like right on the 4th or 5th row, and I got to watch Brett Favre play against, I don't even remember who the Cowboys quarterback was at the time, but watching Brett Favre play, and then I got to watch Tom Brady and the Patriots play. And it was so cool because I was down so low, so close to the field, and I saw the players. I could see their face, on the sidelines. And that field was arched like this, for the runoff. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking over at the players on the other side and the coaches, and you could only see from here up because that's how much it was so cool. Last night at the Stars game, they honored Mike Modano. And I don't know if is there any hockey fans in here? Oh, great. Great. Penguins, yeah. Penguins. And of course, it all depends on where you grew up. If I grew up here, I'd be a fan of Stars, and the Penguins and the Steelers. But anyway, I watch the Stars a lot. In fact, I'm going to a game next week. Well, I had a guy also in my church that he wanted to take me to a Stars game. I'd never been. I was not a hockey fan. I didn't grow up around that. They'd had no hockey in Oklahoma at the time. Certainly not out in the podunk country, where I grew up. And yeah. So I've grown to really love hockey. He wanted to take me to a hockey game. And Mike Modano, he's got all these awards. He helped them win the cup and all that. And so I'm on the glass. I'm on the front row. I could reach out. The glass is right here, Steve. So cool. But I didn't know hardly any players, but I'd heard of Modano. And I love telling this story because I don't get real enamored with. I think people are just the same. I know that they're stars or whatever, but they're just like us. They're not any different. They're not any special. But it's kind of cool to see them, if you've heard of them. And so they were warming up, and the Stars were warming. They would go almost like basketball when you used to do laps, before the game. And they were, coming through and then they come back around, and they were coming along the glass right here where I was at, and I saw Mike Modano. And this is one of the coolest moments of any person I ever met. I'll tell you that, because he went up and our eyes met, and he goes, and I went. That was awesome. It was perfect. But these Greeks, they wanted the front row because there's a difference in being on the front row than up in the nosebleed. And these guys, they didn't want to be they wanted to see Jesus. I'll give you one more example. Had a guy in the church that had a relationship, kind of knew Dwight Yoakam. Anybody know who Dwight Yoakam is? Any country music? And he's also did some acting. You remember The Panic Room? Anybody watch that with Jodie Foster and what's the girl from Twilight? She was in it when she was younger. Yeah, Kristen Stewart was in that. Forrest Whitaker, Jared Leto, is that how you pronounce that, Brent? I think. Musician and then had Dwight Yoakam was in that movie. And so we go to the concert. We're up real close, we got to hear him sing. Well, we got to go backstage. And it wasn't any big deal. It's Dwight Yoakam, but it was kind of cool just to shake his hand. You kind of, when you're that close, Pete, you kind of judge, get an idea of how nice of a person or kind of more of their spirit than just seeing them up on stage. And he was nice. He was just real friendly, and just met us. And these guys, these Greeks, they wanted a backstage pass to be with Jesus. They wanted to see him. They had the luxury of being there at the same time. We don't. The only way we're actually going to see Jesus is through death or his return, right? But do we want to see Jesus? Can we see Jesus? The original word here, translated see in almost every translation, is haraho. And this is what it means. Besides just physically seeing Jesus, this is what the Greeks were saying when we want to haraho Jesus. We want to see with the mind, to perceive, to know this Jesus, to become acquainted by experience. We know the only way we're going to haraho him is to make an effort to do so. So the first thing I want to talk about is being intentional. Being intentional on seeing Jesus. Do you actually want to see him? There's a book, I don't know if you ever heard of it. JW, you read a lot of books. It's entitled Onlooking, A Walker's Guide to the Art of Observation. Have you ever heard of that? It's by, good, then I've got something new. I'm always afraid I'm going to share a book, and he's probably already. It's by Alexandra Horowitz. Alexandra Horowitz. And what this book is about is she wanted to see things a little deeper, see the world around her. She lived in New York, and so she started just by walking a few blocks. She would walk a few blocks around where she lived, and she would try to see things a little deeper, try to see things that she would normally see. Intentional and deliberate about seeing what was around her. And since she did that a few times and she thought, I've seen everything that I can, I'm really trying here, I'm going to bring someone else along to maybe help me see. So and each chapter talks about these different friends, and I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. One time she took an ecologist, and you can imagine what they pointed out as they were walking around. He's pointing out all the animals, all the birds that he's hearing. He's picking up insects and saying, oh, look at this insect right here. Oh, look at these weeds. Look at these plants right here. So he's seeing things from his background, from his education, from a fresh set of eyes. One time she took her toddler son, and you can imagine what that was like. Not only was he seeing from a different physical perspective, but everything was just, he had no bias, no preconceived ideas. He's just, glad about just to be out here and seeing everything, just full of joy and walking. A different relationship of viewing the world around him. And then once she had a blind friend. And she took her blind friend and she was describing everything that she smelled. And everything that she heard, and if she touched anything, she could describe it and just give a totally different perspective than what she was seeing. And then her blind friend said, describe to me what you see. So then she had to be even more detailed, look a little deeper at things, at this this stained glass window to describe to her friend. It made her look a little deeper. So my question today, do you want to haraho him? In our daily routine as we go through life, it's so easy to overlook maybe Christ's purpose and works. The song that Sherry emphasized, and I may get you to come back and sing that, unless another song comes to you. I used to let her pick whatever she felt. Sometimes she would have a song come to her, just whatever you want to do, but at the end I would like for you to do at least that song one more time, if not something else that you want. But that song talks about, we go through many things, and sometimes it's hard to sense His presence, to know His goodness. And we have to by faith look, especially through the hard times, right? We all face issues. There's nobody here that is immune to the negative and the things of this world that come our way, through sickness, through depression, through whatever that hurts us, hurt feelings, getting frustrated, dealing with our jobs, dealing with our kids, dealing with other people, right? But we're going to have to be intentional if we're going to haraho, if we're going to see Jesus, if we're going to see beyond the physical eye at how Jesus is working in these situations. Try and observe the signs and wonders, to engage and perceive in a new perspective. Then maybe we can see Him. The second thing is, it may take not only a deliberate looking, but also some desire and determination. J-Dub knows this well because I think he's even played with us, but whenever me and my brothers grew up, we lived out in the country, and we had to make up our own games. We couldn't afford of course there was probably only Atari back then anyway, as far as video games, but we didn't, we made up our own games all the time. We just couldn't afford all these. I remember when I'd go into school, and I remember when kids, this is in the late 70s, of course. I'm in grade school, and these kids started getting skateboards. I'd never seen a skateboard. Now, all my friends were buying skateboards and rolling around, and I thought, I live on a county gravel road. You know, my mom's not going to let me do it in the kitchen on a tile floor. There's no place for me to do it. So we made up our own games. All my life we've made up our own games. In fact, my brothers still do some of them today. They became youth pastors. Now that most of them are pastors. My one brother's a therapist, but he was in the education field for a long time, and he would do games with his kids, and we just loved. One of the games we did was when we were traveling, we'd be bored to death in the vehicle traveling, and so we got to noticing that there were a lot of hawks that would be on the side of the road. Probably because, there's a path and they mow the side and maybe they could see their prey easier. But we got to where we were counting. We would deliberately and purposely desire to see as many hawks as we could. And we'd keep count. Sometimes a 3-hour trip, we might count 70, 80, 90 hawks on the side of the road. And we told somebody else about that one time. We were sharing what we did, and they go, "What?" I said, "Yeah, these hawks on..." He said, "I've never seen a hawk on the side of the road in my life." Why? They weren't looking for them. We desired to look for them. We purposely did it, and we were in competition to make sure that we beat our last score of whatever many we counted together. And so there takes some desire and determination if you want to haraho Jesus. Often we only see what we want to see. Am I right? And sometimes our prejudice, our biases, our preconditioned ideas cause us to only look on the surface of things. But in order to see Jesus in this world today, we're going to have to look a little deeper. Do any of you guys remember when those stereograms first came out? You know what a stereogram is? Remember those? Those were those pictures that looked like just a bunch of dots. And then you have to almost cross-eyed, or you stare at it a long time, and then maybe this image would come up, and then all of a sudden it would disappear again. And hopefully, you might know what I'm talking about, the stereogram. You had to stare at that thing a while. And you had to look deeper, and you tried to look past it, past those dots, to try to see the picture. I love another story that Horowitz tells in that book. When she was with her toddler son, and I think this exemplifies exactly where we are sometimes in society, and even the church, talking about, churches gathered all across this nation. Sometimes we get so caught up in certain stereotypes and images and things that we see. Well, she was taking her son on that trip around those blocks, trying to look deeper. And she looked up ahead and she saw that homeless man that's always there. Scruffy, talking to himself, kind of, somebody you wouldn't want. I certainly don't want my toddler son to get, kind of grumbling, not just talking to himself, but in a kind of a mean looking way, like he's arguing with himself somewhere inside there. Dirty, smelly, and so just like all of us do, when we see that person on the corner, is all of a sudden we have a reason to be on our phone, something on our phone to look at, or kind of walk way around. So she was planning on doing the same thing. After all, she's got to protect her toddler. So she's going to walk her toddler, going to bring him around. All of a sudden, she can't get him. He stops. She can't get him to, and he's just gazed at this homeless man with all of his grime and dirty and smell, and just gazed at him. And all of a sudden just smiled real big. And then she looked at the bum, and he smiles back real big. And she learned a lesson that day. Sometimes we need to look a little deeper. If we want to be able to see Jesus, haraho him, and the things around us in this world, when it's so hard many times to see him and a lot of the things going on, maybe we need to desire it a little more. We need to be a little more deliberate, to look a little deeper. Maybe we just might haraho Jesus. if we looked with a little more compassion maybe, a little more innocent intrigue, like this child, maybe then. The last thing, the last characteristic, in order to haraho Jesus, maybe it takes a little bit of openness. A little bit of openness. Open to seeing in a different, ordinary, unordinary, or unique way. Maybe even in a little mystical way. Now, for some, that's kind of a witchy word. You start saying mystical, all these different ideas come that are out there. But, you know, I tease my son-in-law. You know, he has lived in a 15 square mile radius all his life. You know, he hasn't seen much of the world. And he's great. I mean, he's a great son-in-law, treats my daughter like a queen, and that's what matters the most, right? Though you fathers that have daughters. But anything that I present or he sees or he comes across that is different or is out of the wheelhouse of what he grew up seeing or knowing, it's weird. Any food that he's never tasted before, that's weird. And everything's weird. So I tease him about that. But in your mind, I think if you want to see Jesus, haraho him, sometimes it may be a little weird. And maybe you have. And you say, I think I have, but it was just out there and I'm not. Well, I think it should be, if you want to see him, sometimes it's just for you. Maybe it's not to share with anyone else. And it may be different. He may reveal himself to you, and I believe he could reveal himself to you. It may be in a different way. I mean, after his resurrection, we're talking about Resurrection Day. That's what we're leading up to, right? We're talking about Lent, talking about drawing closer to him, leading up to Resurrection Day. Well, after his resurrection, didn't he reveal himself in a very weird way? Supernatural ways, did he not? Very well may be with you too. I'm gonna end before I pray here and before Sherry comes, telling the same story that I told on the podcast. And I said it then. How many listened to the podcast? All two of you. Oh, Scott. Yeah, Scott and J-Dub. I have a great time doing that, by the way, Scott. I just really enjoyable, especially if it's on something I'm really passionate about or have that I felt like there's been some transitioning, some growth in. And prayer was one of them we talked about. And I want to tell one of the stories that I told on that on there. And I'd never intended to tell that story because I felt like that was just private that's just between me and the Lord. There wasn't any reason for anybody else. It kind of, if you reveal some of those things, sometimes it takes away from that personal thing a little bit. But I felt like it was time. It was for that. It was the right moment on that podcast, and I'll tell it because it goes in line with this being open and sometimes being a little strange or weird. I'm going to tell the story, Steve. We had grown in our church. We were meeting at a school, met at a school for 5 years, set up, tear down every week. And we had grown to the point we had to have a building. We just needed to. Besides that, the school said, listen, you've been here 5 years, it's time. And we bought property, and we were in the process of building. We started a building. I had not intended on being as involved in that, but through circumstances and various things, I ended up being more involved in that than I wanted to or needed to, and things I didn't know. Anyway, make a long story short, I was stressed out. I mean, I was handling things I don't think a pastor should be handling. Others should have been handling that, but here I was overseeing finance. You start talking about millions of dollars, and you start dealing with all people and dealing with issues with the city and all these kind of things that, meetings and this. I was stressed. I was not handling well. I was not sleeping well. Sherry could tell you with my kids, I was snapping at them at home. I was quick to be angry just because I felt all this pressure. It's a lot of responsibility, and things just weren't, I just wasn't myself. I wasn't myself at all, and I was really struggling. So I just went out, and I decided I'm going to talk to God, and I'm going to tell him how it is. And so I was walking out, and I wanted to walk on the property. I wanted to be close to, because here's this building, it's just getting started, and we're running into all, and so I just want to talk to him. I'm about 50 yards from a road. There's a school our kids walked to school. That's how close it were. It was a great location. And people were bringing their kids to school that morning. And you could see cars going by. And so I'm walking out there, and I'm just talking, and I'm to the point, Tim, I'm about to cry. I felt all this pressure, and I thought, I don't even know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe I've just totally lost it. Maybe I'm just out here doing my own thing, and I was supposed, I didn't feel God. I was just so, and I just was talking to him. I was telling him, and just being so frustrated. And then all of a sudden, I paused for just a second. Thought I was going to cry, and all of a sudden, from deep within here, I started going, just started laughing a little bit, just started chuckling. Next thing you know, it began to boil up, and I began to laugh. I don't think I've ever laughed that hard. I was doubled over laughing. In the middle of laughing, I'm looking over at these cars going by saying, I am going to be embarrassed. Somebody is going to call the Wacko Farm on me, and they're going to come get me. And I'm just laughing, and I couldn't stop. I fell over on the ground. I was laughing so hard. And and that happened, I don't know, it felt like it was for 30 minutes, but it was probably just a couple of minutes. And things kind of dialed down, and I picked myself up, and I embarrassed myself, and all of a sudden I just felt this. I didn't hear some audible voice or anything. I just felt this. All of a sudden my heart says, I got you. I got you. And after that, things just began to fall in place, and we built this building. Pressure's relieved, and that was, and I don't tell that story, and that's weird. Is it weird? You better believe it's weird. Just to start laughing in the middle, that's woo, 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 woo stuff. But I saw Jesus that day. I hurrah-hoed him. And I had to look a little deeper. I had to be open to experience something just a little bit different. And it was just between me and him. So, in closing, as Sherry comes, I want to pray for you today that you will intentionally try to see Jesus, to hurrah-ho him, to know him, to experience him, that you will desire it, and that you'll be open. So this is what I'd like you to do. I always do things a little different if you've known me by now. In a second, not yet, I want you to close your eyes and I want to pray for you. But when you close your eyes, this is what I'd like for you to do. I would like for you just to visualize your daily routine. Whether it's now that you're retired, going up to the golf club every day, visualize that. Visualize whatever your routine is, taking the kids to school, going to grocery. If it's at home, just visualize when you do go out, where that is. I just want you to visualize your daily, kind of like in this book, Harowitz. I just want you to visualize your daily routine. And in your mind's eye, look beyond what you normally see. That sign, that old house where they need to get rid of that cold car in the front, whatever it may be, or, the traffic. Try to look beyond. I realize it's just an exercise, but maybe it will begin to train you that tomorrow in your daily routine, you will look a little bit deeper and maybe see hurrah-ho, experience Jesus in a different way. Would you close your eyes? Lord, we're thankful. We're so thankful for this church, for each person that is here today. And as we're building up to celebrating the greatest celebration that we as believers celebrate, and that's your resurrection. We want to draw closer to you. We want to haraho you, Lord. I pray for each individual here today. As right now they're visualizing their daily routine that they go through all the time, that they will desire, that they will intentionally look a little deeper to haraho you. And they'll be open, even if it might be a little strange, and it might be a little weird, that they'll be open to see you in a new and fresh way. We ask these things in your precious name.